repair, that people can come together and repair their places and their waters and their relationships.
Another important thing to understand about why societal collapse is an appropriate term for what's going on is that we live in hyper-complex societies. We live in industrial consumer societies. And so we can't simply just shrink, because so many of the consumer goods we use require mass industrial production. And so the economics just fall apart if people aren't buying as much, or if there's problems with the supply chain providing one component or one material. So this is where an actual collapse in production is possible because of these hyper-complex systems that we depend on.
That's right. Feed Moloch and the interdependent web of global commerce. Capital and labor all depend on resources. Resources stem from ecology. And we have somehow mismanaged the household with our economics. And we have forgotten that all of economic activity is built on the back of the health and wealth of ecological systems. Wow. We've forgotten that. Or at least we turn a blind eye, or some of us turn a blind eye to it. Or we somehow operate day to day under the guise of some sort of corporate speak enchantment. We must progress. We must obsolesce. Progress, obsolesce, expand. To the stars, to Mars. Let's send a probe into the sun, Icarus.
What was the tweet you got that so upset you?
Well, this one gentleman sent me a tweet that said, "Careful, Icarus."
Well, why does that upset you then? Is that your name?
No, it's actually a reference to a Greek mythological story.
That.
That's what I said. That.
But isn't that curious? During the COVID pandemic, particularly in the United States, where I live, the governments panicked. They said, oh no, we cannot have the consumer society falter. It cannot stagger and fall to the ground. We must fuel this drunkard. Keep him going. So they gave everybody money. They gave them incentives. Wall Street blew up in 2021. They gave us money, not because they care about citizenry. They gave people money to prop up an economy that was being poorly guided and policed by the situation surrounding the pandemic. The vaccines, the rhetoric, the extra $600, the infamous $600 a week for unemployment benefits, the credits. It was all about making sure you stay connected. You have to pay your bills. If you don't pay your bills and you don't consume and you don't buy the latest gadget, what happens? Profits fall. The GDP falls. We have all sorts of consequences collectively when we had decided to build the social contract to be geared towards a pattern of consumption that is not sustainable. The consequences, we are told, collapse of economic life, barbarous behavior, would probably ensue. It's very sad when you realize that the only incentive to get people to collaborate is through economic means. And it should make you angry. I mean, what drives the passions and the will of the people? Is it primarily money? Or is there a hierarchy involved in decision making? Who dictates the social contract? Beyond these questions, I'd just like to point out that the COVID pandemic was a perfect example where the house showed its hand. And the house of cards, right? It can crumble. But they pumped the whole economy full of money to keep it going because of exactly this. We live in a post-industrial consumer society. And it's built on ecological exploitation.
That somewhat parallels natural systems, oddly, which is that ecosystems don't just continually degrade year on year. At some point, their interrelationships snap, and an ecosystem can just collapse, and therefore our habitat changes entirely. And this is, so when we look at, say, climatic changes, people talk about tipping points. And so one of them would be a certain amount of loss of sea ice, which would therefore mean that so much more of the sun's energy would be absorbed into the darker oceans because it's not being reflected back into space. So once you lose the sea ice to a certain extent, then you've got self-reinforcing warming, what some people call runaway warming, which reminds us that it becomes something that we can't effectively do much about, which is the scary thing.